before I start, I just wanted to ask, who of you in your day jobs have to work with a security team? Can you put your hand up? Can you keep your hand up if you actually like working with your security team? That's kind of what I expected. So hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll see that not all security teams are bad. Some of us actually really want to help people write secure code. So kind of what I want to do initially in this talk is just give a quick introduction to myself and to Riot, for those of you who don't know who we are. Then I want to talk about 3 different areas to do with Riot application security. I actually want to talk about how we approach application security at Riot, and then call out 2 specific areas which are very important to us, which is our bug bounty program, and then some of the automation that we've delivered for software engineers at Riot to try and help them build secure products. So before I jump into my intro, who has heard of Riot Games or played League of Legends before? Okay, that's pretty cool. I'll try and quickly go through the intros. So as you know, my name's David. I'm a senior security engineer at Riot Games. I lead our global application security program, which basically means that me and my team try and help anyone in Riot around the world who write code. Whether it's the game client that ships to tens of millions of people, whether it's mobile apps, APIs for developers, whatever it is, if they write code, we're there to support them. In addition to that, I also own our bug bounty program, which, you know, the TLDR on that is, it's a program where we actually invite hackers to try and break the things that we build, and then we pay them money for telling us about the issues. So I'm going to talk about that a bit later because it plays a big part in making our application security program better. So I've been doing application security full-time for about 10 years now. I've been at Riot doing that for 2.5 years. So I joined Riot to build their application security program from scratch. But I'd been doing that for close to 8 years in financial services before I joined Riot. Obviously, doing it in financial services versus doing it in the computer games industry is quite different. And it's probably no surprise if I say it's more fun doing that in the games industry, in my opinion. So, like everyone else at Riot, I play a lot of games. Sadly, I'm not actually very good at many games, certainly not the one that we develop and publish anyway. So for those of you who don't know, Riot are the developers and publisher of a game called League of Legends. And so League of Legends is one of the most played computer games in the world. As a company, we try and make sure we always focus on the player experience first, right? Whether it's an in-person event, it's something we add to the game, it's a mobile app, it's all about what does the player experience. Is it a positive experience to them? And also what that means for the security team is we need to consider the impact of our security decisions, both security controls we may or may not implement, but also how we evaluate the impact of security issues. Because we're not looking at it like we do, like a lot of other companies might, like I did in financial services. We don't look at a security vulnerability and think, well, it's going to cost us X million of dollars if someone breaches this. It's in a slightly different context. It's more in the context of if someone exploits this, what does this actually mean to our players? What is the impact on them? Is it that their account is stolen? Well, that's a big deal for us, right? And we all play a lot of games. We have a lot of people around the world. The little red dots on the screen are just where our security team are based. So we're mainly based in Los Angeles, St. Louis, Dublin, and Seoul. So I'm based in our Dublin office, and so is most of our application security team. So as I said, the game's pretty popular. These figures are a couple of years old, but you can see even by these old numbers, tens of millions of people play League of Legends every month. So it's a very popular game. So what does that mean for a security team? Well, it means we're a big target, right? If you're a group that gets your fame on social media by causing denial of service attacks, well, why would you not target League? And they've all targeted us over the years, because if you take down League of Legends and nearly 70 million people can't play the game, well, then that makes the news, right? It reaches Reddit, it's all over Twitter. Plus, we've also got a lot of data stored that probably malicious people want to try and steal. One of the other things we do that's pretty cool and a little bit different is this thing called esports. So League of Legends is currently the biggest esports in the world. The TLDR on that is this is people who play computer games for a living. This is their job. They play this, they breathe it, they live in a house together, they play this game for 12, 13, 14 hours a day, coaches, managers, analysts, all these kind of things, and they play in big arenas, right? So this image here is from our World Final last year. So this is the Mercedes-Benz Arena in Berlin. So there's tens of thousands of people in the arena, and the final was watched by 36 million people online. So more relevant to maybe people here, our quarterfinals last year were actually at Wembley Arena. And so we sold out Wembley Arena for the quarterfinals for 4 days in a row. So it's a really big thing. But again, what does that got to do with security apart from being quite cool? Ignoring the physical security aspect, because thankfully I only have to deal with the code side of things, not the physical security of tens of thousands of people. But if you think, if a team has so much on the line, right? It's a big tournament, tens of millions of people watching you. What if there's a bug that you know about that you can exploit during the world final that causes a remake of a game that you're losing? Maybe that leads to you winning the next game and winning the world final. Right, so it's not necessarily just about the normal kind of security bugs or exploitation of bugs that a lot of security people would think about. Right? We have to think about the impact of poor code or insecure code on the integrity of esports as well. Anyway, I want to talk about Riot application security. And so I said, the title of this talk here is about leveling up your application security program. Now, I'm not the type of security person who's going to stand here and tell you what you should go away and do. Because you all work in different companies, different sizes, different cultures, all these different things, right? What I'm going to talk to you about is what has worked for us at Riot over the past 2.5 years. And if you take just one of these things away and it helps you improve AppSec in one area, then that's cool. I get that maybe not everything is going to work for everyone, but I just want to tell you about what has worked for Riot. So when we think about our application security team, this is our mission. Our mission is to arm every software engineer with the tools and the knowledge they need to build safe and secure experiences for players and rioters. So what that ultimately means is, if you write code somewhere in the world at Riot, whether it's for internal use for rioters, or whether it's something that players will use, we as a team want to make sure that you have everything you need to build that securely. So we're not coming in being like these police, these auditor kind of security people that you might have interacted with. We're not here to block you from building those things. Our job is more like the support champion in our game. So the guy you see on the screen now is a guy from our game called Brom. And so he's a support champion. And ultimately his job is to go into a part of the map with another type of champion who at the start needs protection. He needs support, he needs to kind of have opportunities set up for him, and needs to be enabled to be successful. And if that happens, then that champion can go off, be super successful without the support. Our job as a security team is to be that support champion for software engineers. And so it's not exactly the same as the game, right? But we need to go and figure out what a software engineer needs from us for the type of product they're building, for how they build things, and then we give them what they need. Because then they get strong, they're enabled to be successful, and they can go away and build secure experiences that are also fun and positive for our players without needing security people all of the time. And so we don't have enough people to work with every one of those directly. So I'm going to talk about some of the things we do going through the talk to enable software engineers to build things. Because ultimately we have millions of lines of code being written all around the world. And it can be from everything from maybe the Moscow office wants to write a mobile app just for players in Russia, right the way through to the new version of the game client that we just shipped, which will go to tens of millions of computers all around the world. So there's a lot of different product types, a lot of different code. Languages used is about 18 different programming languages in Riot, from ones that you can probably imagine through to ones that are a little bit more obscure, like Erlang. We've got a lot of Erlang because of our chat system was forked from eJabba. And so as a security team, we need to understand, again, how do you actually write secure code in all of those languages? And even within those languages, the frameworks that are being used could also mean different things from a security point of view. I sat in the Angular talk earlier, and my first thought was, yeah, Riot engineers will probably want to use Angular too. What do we need to do as a security team to enable them to do that securely? And so that's about research, figuring out with Angular 2, what do you do or don't get from a security point of view from default? And so really, the kind of culture that we want to build is this one of fighting together, not like a game of League of Legends where you're fighting against other people. Because if we do that as security people, if we're fighting with software engineers, and our software engineers put their hand down when someone asks them if they like working with their security team, then we're failing, right? On both sides, because ultimately, as a security team, we want Riot to ship these products to players that have no security vulnerabilities in them. Ultimately, our product teams want the same thing. They don't want to ship the coolest thing in the world, which actually also means players get their accounts stolen, right? So we ultimately want the same thing. But I also get that most people have had negative experiences when trying to work with security teams, right? They come in, they block you, they slow you down, all these different things they do, right? So the thing for us is going and working with those product teams. Actually go and meet them, learn what those product teams do, how they actually build things, what technologies they use, what product types they're building. And so it's less about the tech side of things and actually just more reaching out initially and learning from them, because ultimately they are the ones that write those millions of lines of code, right? That write game clients, game servers, mobile apps, APIs, websites, and so on. If we don't work with them, then none of us are going to get what we want. We're not going to get secure things for players. So a lot of this then is about reaching out to those teams and figuring out what is important to them. Because we know as a security team what's important to us, but we need to figure out what is important to the individual teams. And every one of them is going to be slightly different, especially if they're building very different product types and targeting very different people. So a couple of the ways that we do this is, well, data is an important thing for us, right? We have a centralized project in Jira for every single security vulnerability that's found anywhere in Riot. So it doesn't just have to be a secure coding issue, but any vulnerability in Riot goes into this project. A ticket is created and assigned to the relevant people. So what that allows us to do, because we tag them with the product type, with the specific vulnerability type and so on, allows us to identify the problems that our engineers have. So we don't just come along and say, oh, look, PCI or the OS top 10 says these 3 things are the most important problems, because they generally aren't for our engineers, or the order is very different. So the data helps us figure that out, but I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on, because it's directly led us to build certain automation that I'm going to talk about later. But when I visit a lot of the Riot offices, most of my time is spent actually in meetings, and you might think that that's pretty boring, and I'm not a fan of meetings in general, but I get to meet with software engineers, I get to meet with product owners, who are the people I want to work with, because ultimately they're the people building products, right? They're the ones prioritizing features for products, and they also own the security of their own product. So when we raise a security issue, we help them understand what it means, what the player impact is, and so on, but they own the decision about when they fix it or not. So it's important for me to meet with those people and learn what they need from us. So we discuss a lot of different things, but I always ask one question. And that is, when you're sat there doing your day job every day, what is it that you wished you had from us? And the answers to that question over the past couple of years has actually significantly shaped our application security roadmap and shaped what we deliver to our product teams. Because we're not just going to sit there as a security team and think we know best and build things and buy things and try and push them out onto software engineers, right? We want to go to those teams and ask them, what do you need from us? Because in all of my time as an application security person, not just at Riot, I've never met a single person who wants to ship something that has security vulnerabilities in it. I think where the problem often is, they run into security people who probably make them not want to engage with security going forward. We don't want that. So one of the important things we did very early on was trying to think about how we actually share security knowledge with all these engineers around the world. Now, as I said, most engineers, every engineer actually I've ever interacted with, hundreds, probably thousands at this point over the years, they don't want to ship insecure products, but they also don't want to sit in a classroom for 1 or 2 days with a boring security presentation, right? I wouldn't want to, and I'm a security person. But a lot of people are subjected to that kind of security torture rather than security training. And so we wanted to figure out, like, how do we avoid that at Riot? How do we get security knowledge out to our engineers, but in a way that they're actually going to take notice of and remember? Because if you sit in a classroom for 2 days every year, are you really going to remember the security tips from that 6 months down the line when you're actually trying to ship something? Probably not, right? So we borrowed an idea that was already in place in Riot Engineering. When I first joined Riot, I noticed the engineers had these little cards on their desk, and the cards were what they call a definition of done card. Super simple, and it's just like, hey, before you check your code in, these are all the things that you should have done before you do that. Right? And so I wanted to piggyback on that idea, so we made these cards. So it's an image now, but they're actually cards about this big that we got made and shipped to every software engineer around the world at Riot. And the point of them was not to be the most in-depth security resource they've ever had, right? It was also not to cover every single security problem that they might encounter. it was us using our data and kind of historical breach information and figuring out, well, what do we want software engineers to care about the most? What do we want them to remember when they're doing their day job? And so you'll see the points on the screen, there's nothing there particularly fancy about them, but they're things that if a product team did all of those things right, if they were applicable, then it would be in a very good shape from a security point of view. And so what we also wanted to include on that card is 2 websites that we created. AppSecDesign.riotgames.com is an internal website that someone can go to, and it will step them through at like a design phase, like a checklist for different product types. The kind of security questions a security person would ask you if they are working with you on this right now. And the questions are written in such a way that if it's yes or not applicable to all of those questions, you don't need to come and speak with security at this stage. But if you answer no or you're not sure on one of those questions, that's kind of your sign to reach out to us, and we'll help you figure out what you should try and do from that point on. SecureCoding.riotgames.com was our approach at taking these points and actually making them useful to all of these different engineers working in these different languages and frameworks. So we made sure that we took away all the kind of waffly descriptions about security vulnerabilities. So, we talk about using prepared statements, and we have a one-liner on why that's important. We don't dig into, SQL injection is why you've got to use this, and all the different SQL injection types and so on, because that's not really what our engineers need to know when they sit down and they want to write secure code, right? So what they see is if they go to that website, there's just a list of all the programming languages we use at Riot. They click on the one that they're working with, and then they're taken to a page where each of these points and a few more are on the page, and then underneath each one we have a one-line description and then a code sample of how we as a security team think you should use prepared statements, for example, in PHP or whatever language you're working with. And so what we've also done on top of that is tried to figure out what frameworks are used by developers as well. So if you go to Python, the Python page, it'll talk about Python, but then there's a section for Flask, for example. It'll actually explain, well, some of these things, particularly, the output encoding part is different in Flask, right? You get some things for free by default. And so that's what we want our engineers to get, right? Is to quickly get this information they need so they can get on with building the things they need to build. And so, again, ultimately, it's all about enabling engineers to build secure experiences for players, right? We don't want to be the security team that gets in the way. We want to be a security team who helps and is seen as a team who actually helps engineers write secure code and ship things. Because ultimately, if we don't do that and we're a blocker and we slow them down or we try and get them to change the way that they work, well, we'll be ignored and we won't be embraced. And I can't fault them for that. If we try and do those things and engineering teams ignore us, then we've failed. We've not given them what they need to build things securely. And ultimately, neither of us get what we want, right? They don't want security vulnerabilities in their products, and neither do we, so we need to work together. So by doing these things, we kind of got to this point where actually it's created a separate problem for us where we have so many people wanting to work with us, we don't actually have enough application security resources to do all the work at the moment. But that's a much better problem to have than the situation where teams don't want to work with you. And so ultimately, when teams come and work with us, we don't act like that normal security team where we've got this checklist and we're like, hey, you've got to do all of these things before you can ship. So we don't offer a one-size-fits-all solution. It's almost like a menu where we're like, hey, here's all the things that we can offer as an application security team. That can be anything from, a design review. We can embed resources in your teams that we have people currently embedded in product teams actually helping them write the security controls in their code, right the way through to doing like a penetration test or whatever it might be the team wants. And that's the key, though, that it's what the team wants, right? They own the security of their product. So we have to help them understand what risks they have in their product potentially, because it's very different for a game client versus a mobile app versus an API, for example. It's different security problems they have, and some of the services we offer are more or less valuable to those teams. But I found that because we're very open with those teams, we really explain the value or not of taking different services. They tend to actually take more than what we actually recommend, because they understand that we're not trying to get in their way, but there's value because they understand the value of having these things there. And so by doing a lot of that outreach and working with those product teams, we actually start to identify people within product teams who are what we call a security champion. And this is really a developer who, initially might not be, fantastic at their security knowledge, but they want to learn more about it. They're passionate about learning more about security. And so what we do is when we identify people like that is we give them a lot more of our time. We give them extra training if they want it. We give them extra guidance. They're normally the ones who get our automated tools first. And we've even gone as far as a security team, buying security training for them. So paying for security training courses for them, buying conference tickets to security conferences, which they might not have been able to get sign-off from as a software engineer. So we buy those tickets for them and bring them to the conferences with the security team, because ultimately the only way that we'll actually scale up application security is to identify these kind of people within product teams, level them up from a security point of view, and support them, right? And over time they require less and less support. They will actually have more of an impact in their product team when it comes to kind of promoting a positive kind of security approach to software development than we ever will as this kind of team outside of the product teams, right? So those people get a lot more of our time, and we really help them try and level up. So the next thing I want to talk about was our bug bounty program. So has anyone here been in a bug bounty program, run one, anything like that? Okay, cool. So basically, bug bounties have been around for quite a while. Riot launched ours almost 2 years ago. Really, the point of a bug bounty program is you invite hackers to come and break what you're shipping, right? And so we include everything in scope. It could be our infrastructure, it could be the game, it could be websites, mobile apps, everything. And these people are free to go after those, try and break them, find security issues, and then report them to us, and we pay them money. So I did a full 1-hour talk on our bug bounty program a couple of weeks ago. It should be published on our engineering blog in the next couple of weeks. So this is more of a high-level overview of our bug bounty program, why we do it, and what it actually changes for our AppSec program. So like a lot of security programs, a lot of them tend to start with you having a data breach, right? And our thoughts around trying to reward people for security information or giving us information about security problems we have started back in 2012, where we had quite a large data breach here in Europe, and we lost a lot of player data. What we found as part of the investigation into that incident was a hacker had found a way to get remote access to one of our servers. We didn't have a way for him to get paid for telling us about that, so he just sold access to it on a hacking forum. It would have been nice to have known about that, right? Or at least had an avenue to reward people for doing this. The other thing that was important back then, and this is again one of the things that's maybe a bit different about doing security in a games company, is League started to get really popular. When a game starts to get popular, what do people want to do? Cheat. Right? Anyone in this room has ever played a game before has probably cheated in a game. Right? Whether it was back in the olden days where you would type out a cheat code from a magazine or use a Game Genie device or any of those kind of things. And I think if you're playing by yourself or in a sandboxed environment, cheating is actually pretty fun, right? It can add an extra dimension to the game. But when you bring cheating and cheat tools into a game with 9 other players, and you're now playing by a different set of rules in a way that is very unfair and they can't compete with, well, then that's a problem, and we want to do something about it. So those two things really drove us to create ways for people to report issues to us and be paid for it. And so initially, we didn't tell people we were doing this. We interacted with a few people who were reporting security issues to us and hired them essentially as a short-term contractor. We paid them well, we hired them, I think it was for 90 days. And for a lot of different reasons, that didn't really scale up. Once we got to 3 of them, we realized that actually we do want to reward people for doing this kind of research, but there's a lot of legal, paperwork, payments, all those kind of things that come with bringing people in. So it turns out there are specialist companies who actually make these things easier for you. So we use a company called HackerOne. There are other providers out there. The best way to think of it is they provide a platform to connect you with these hackers, where you basically advertise, hey, this is the stuff I want people to try and break, and then you make payments and so on through that. They do a lot of that kind of work on your behalf, the legal, the payment side of things, getting hackers on the platform and so on. So we use HackerOne. So we started with HackerOne in 2014, but we didn't go public about our program until the end of 2014. And so last year was really about actually taking our program from being brand new to hopefully being one of the best in the world that the best hackers in the world want to be part of. And then this year is really about trying to really push things forward. I'm not going to go into too much detail in that. The other talk that's coming out from Riot will have that. The next 2 videos on these 2 short slides, they're 2 short videos, but they kind of sum up what we want to get from a bug bounty program. So this first one is kind of an example of what we want less of, right? Where we're charging along, we're doing our day job, shipping things, building cool things, and then out of nowhere, we get hit with a security vulnerability, right? Something that exploited, all of our data is on Pastebin or it's on the front page of Reddit, and then you're left scrambling, right? You're left scrambling to try and protect your company, try and protect your players, your customers, and then you get hit with this big axe, which is kind of what it feels like if any of you have ever been on the end of a data breach and you're kind of trying to react to these problems. It doesn't feel good, right? You don't want to be on the receiving end of that too many times, right? So we don't want these security vulnerabilities to be out there, people not tell us about them, and then malicious people find them and exploit them, right? So we want to be more like this, where we know there will be security vulnerabilities. You can't get away from that. You're going to have those fights, right? You're going to have those problems to solve, but if researchers shine a light on the problem before it becomes a big problem for us, then we can do something about it, right? So we can have this fight, we can fix the problem before it turns into, poor Leona there getting hit by a big axe again, right? So really the point is, we want to be more like the big angry cat dude here, responding to a security submission rather than being smashed because we didn't know about these things. And so we're trying to build what we feel is one of the best programs in the world. So these different images you see on the screen now, the different ranks in League of Legends. The red arrow is under the very best one, and we're not there yet. Just like most League of Legends players will never get to that rank, most bug bounty programs will never be one of the best in the world. But that's what we want to get to. We're not there yet. We think we're doing okay, and I want to show you something on the next slide that kind of backs that up. So this is data that HackerOne publishes, and it compares the Riot Games program to the average enterprise on HackerOne. And you can see in our worst area, which is response efficiency, we're still above the average. In our best areas, which is reward competitiveness, which is how much we pay people for security vulnerability information, and the amount of vulnerabilities fixed, those are two very important ones. If you want to attract the best researchers, you can see we're significantly above the average there. But what does all of this have to do with leveling up an application security program? Well, firstly, you can see that we actually fix 90% or close to 90% of the security vulnerabilities reported to us, which means that over the past year to 18 months, all of our products have significantly leveled up their security. But that doesn't answer my question really about the program, right? You have a ton of really smart hackers out there breaking your stuff. They're happy to tell you about how they've broken your products. Now you need to take that information and feed that back into your training, into the tools you develop, and so on. And some of the tools I'm going to talk about later were directly driven by data from the vulnerability project. So don't just look at them as security vulnerabilities, figure out, what is it actually highlighting to you? Are there root causes that you can deal with a tool, with training, whatever it might be? And if you go down this route, I would tell you, the bug bounty program's fantastic, and they all come charging in like zigs here and blowing stuff up and breaking things. But if you look at that and think that's an inconvenience, then probably a bug bounty program is not for you. If you look at that and think, actually, that's pretty cool, that we'll be told about these security vulnerabilities in our products and we'll pay someone and we'll fix it, then they're going to be very useful to you. But yeah, if you view it as an inconvenience and you're not happy that these people are trying to break the things you're building, it's not going to work out for you. And bug bounty is not for everyone, for sure. It's like I talked about before, right? Some of these things won't work everywhere. But what we've seen and other companies have seen is it actually does add a significant new dimension to your security program. The way we talk about it in the security industry is you're getting hacked anyway. People are trying to break your stuff every day, regardless. Like we saw 4 years ago, someone was breaking our stuff and sold that to a hacker instead. The difference with the bug bounty program is they're breaking your stuff every day, but they're going to tell you about it. So just something to think about. But back to our application security team, when these issues come in, we don't just throw them over the wall to a product team and hope that they can deal with the problem, right? We try and figure out what they need from us. Right? So we get a security vulnerability reported, and then we need to try and figure out what does the product team need from us to be able to fix this. And I was in LA a couple of weeks ago, and it turns out some product teams have actually wanted something different from us. But that's the value of going and having those conversations. So we create those vulnerability tickets. They have things like a risk score in them. I know I'm a security person, it's probably no surprise I mentioned a risk score, right? But our developers, some of them looked at it and like, yep, that tells us what we need to know. But then I met a different product team, and they were like, actually, it doesn't tell us anything. The way we prioritize any feature change is the impact on players. Your risk score doesn't actually tell us what SQL injection means to one of our players, right? And so that's where we need to figure out, well, okay, how do we report these things differently? Because at Riot, at least, as I said before, they own the security of their product, and they own the security decisions about their product as well, and how they prioritize those issues. So it's in our best interest as a security team to make sure that they get what they need from us to prioritize those things accordingly. So in this section, I wanted to talk about automation. And so I'm not going to talk about all of the automation we do at Riot. I wanted to call out a couple of specific things. I also felt like I couldn't come and speak at DevOps and actually talk about some code that I've written myself. So I'm not one of those security people who doesn't write code. Actually, most of our application security team will spend maybe 50 to 80% of their time actually writing code. And it's probably an area that a lot of people who work as developers full-time don't actually consider as a career path. But my last hire was someone who'd only ever worked as a developer. If you write code and you understand how to do that securely, then application security is maybe a path for people to take. So I wanted to talk about automation and talk about two things in particular, which kind of expand into maybe 3 or 4 things as we go on. And it kind of, I guess, goes without saying that we all want more automation, right? Whether it's security or any other part of the development process. We all want these little tools and services and so on that are going to take away crappy manual jobs that we don't want to do and do them for us. But unlike a lot of security teams, I don't want us to rush out and just buy a static analysis tool and push it over to a product team and hope that it works for them. We only try and automate the things that we feel we can reliably automate. Right, so it's not like we just look at the data and say, oh, well, A, B, and C are our top problems. That's what we're going to try and automate. We actually look at those problems and figure out, how can we actually automate these things in a way that actually helps people, that aren't noisy, that aren't throwing loads of false positives every day. And so at a high level, we decided to focus on 2 specific areas. Firstly was automation of the verification of vulnerabilities submitted to our bug bounty program. So when a researcher submits a problem, someone in your team has to verify that as a human, have to reproduce what someone has submitted and so on. I wanted to see if we can add automation to do that without a human. So I'm going to show you something we built there in a minute. And then the other area where our engineers had the biggest problems was writing JavaScript that was free from common security vulnerabilities. In fact, cross-site scripting, which is something some of you might have heard about, actually accounted for 40% of all of our security vulnerabilities across Riot. So a combination of looking at that data and then talking with engineers led us to believe that, yeah, we need to do something to help deal with this. So the first one I wanted to talk about was the bug bounty automation. And so when you run a bug bounty program, you have one big cost. Money is the obvious one, right? You have to pay people. But the other one is the resource cost. Because for every single one of those issues that is submitted, you need a human to reproduce and escalate and so on what the researcher has submitted. Now, we operate what we call a hybrid program, which is, in short, you tend to have private, kind of stealthy bug bounty programs that no one talks about, or you have fully public ones like Facebook, for example, where you could go home tonight, find an issue, and submit it straight to Facebook. Ours is kind of in the middle, because we want to control the quality of the people that come into our program. So we talk about it, right, and I'm talking about it today, but you only get into the program if you've submitted a valid issue initially, or we come and invite you directly. So we don't have quite the resource costs that other teams around the world would have, but in total, dealing with bug bounty submissions accounted for around 5% of Riot application security time last year. You know, some bugs take like a minute. If you've got a real simple reflected cross-site scripting issue, as a security person, you're just going to click on the link, see if you get an alert pop-up box, and it's like, yep, that looks like a reflected cross-site scripting issue. Might be a minute, right? If we have some really complex game bugs, well, that's going to take us longer. That could take us a day. We could have to involve game engineers and so on. Then that time starts to add up. So we haven't completely solved the automated verification of submissions, but I want to show you a little bit about what I started with and kind of what we have now. And so we started with that real simple use case. So we knew that cross-site scripting was a big problem for us, and this is actually just a slightly modified version of a real issue that we had, right? So really what's going to happen there is if someone clicks on that link, it's just going to display an alert pop-up with document.domain in it. By itself, not harmless, but an attacker could potentially replace that with any JavaScript they want, right? It could do whatever you want. Grab their document.cookie value and send it to your remote server so you can take over their session, a lot of different things. But as a security engineer, when that comes in, you don't have to be like Kenan here and break out your best ninja skills to verify it. You literally click on the link, is there an alert pop-up, and is the right kind of value in there? Or you might copy and paste it and hit enter, right? So that's super simple, but then I felt, well, okay, it's pretty simple, so we can probably just write code to do this for us. And that's where we wrote our first little kind of AppSec robot. And so the first version of this proof of concept that I wrote actually didn't really save humans time at all, because I had to copy and paste the URL and run it from the command line. But the point was, it was just a proof of concept. So I used Phantom.js and Casper.js, which is just using JavaScript to do browser automation. And it was real simple. So I want to quickly show you that code now. There's not a lot of it. That's pretty small. Well, I'll just step you through anyway what it does. There's only about 40 lines of code there that's particularly useful in this case. Really, what Phantom is going to do here is try and open the URL that we passed to it, which if it's the one I showed before, it's going to then look to see if we get an alert pop-up box, and then it has a slightly different bit of logic, whether it's a document.domain or document.cookie value within the proof of concept URL, which are just two common ones that researchers will use. And then if both of those things are present, so we open a page and alert pop-up appears and the right value is in there, then we can say that this looks like a genuine cross-site scripting issue, which means that we're at the point where we probably don't need a human to verify this issue. Okay, so that was version 1, and it wasn't like super effective, as in, it helped us a bit, as in it helped us encourage us really to follow this path a bit further. And then what I wanted to do was kind of level that up a bit. So we have a hackathon at Riot called Thunderdome, where like 600-700 people internally take part in this thing over 3 days. So it's not just engineers, like anyone in Riot could take part in this. So what I decided to do was take this proof of concept and build something that really didn't need a human involved. So what this would do, we have 40% of our vulnerabilities being cross-site scripting, which means that probably over the year, 2 to 3% of our AppSec team time was spent verifying these types of vulnerabilities. For version 2, I moved away from Phantom and Casper.js. I'm not super good with JavaScript. I'm a little better with Java, which is why I went with the Selenium WebDriver for the second version. I'm going to show you a short video in a second, but it shows the tool logging into HackerOne, which is the bug bounty platform, finding a new cross-site scripting submission from a researcher, verifying the proof of concept URL like you just saw in the other code, or maybe you didn't see because it was too small, but it follows the same approach. And then it'll come back to the HackerOne submission and add a ticket saying that looks like a valid issue. And it'll do all of that in about 20 seconds. So what this would allow us to do for reflective cross-site scripting issues going forward is not need a human to do the verification of that issue. So it's gone through that process that I talked through before and the Phantom.js code went through, but then it comes back to HackerOne and adds a ticket. And the next step would be to just, if we as a team have confidence in this tool, then it could do the escalation and create the tickets in Jira and all those kind of things off the back of that. Right, so we're not completely there yet. I'm not willing to completely remove my team from the bug bounty verification process, but it's something that we're working on to make security engineers' lives easier. So what about software engineers? So I talked about before about how one of the biggest problems our engineers had, both from the data and the discussions we had with them, was insecure JavaScript. Mainly cross-site scripting, but other issues in there as well. And this kind of comes back to the stuff I talked about earlier, about working together with product teams. Because the first thing we actually built here is something that an engineer told me to build. So when I asked him the question I talked about earlier, like, what is it you want from us? He actually said, I went to your secure coding site, I looked at the JavaScript page, helpful, but could be better. Because we listed all of these different ways you could write JavaScript insecurely. Functions that if you use in this way without doing encoding and so on, you could have a security problem. So he said, well, look, my team use a static analysis tool called ESLint, which some of you might be familiar with. And he was like, well, why don't you take the things you've got on that page and write security rules for ESLint so we can just add that into our build process. Now, I get excited when I get cool ideas like that from an engineer, so I was like, cool, yeah, I'll write those rules. Even for ESLint, where it's been designed to make writing rules easy, it's not a trivial task to write static analysis rules. But what I did is I took all of the important things from that secure JavaScript page and wrote a set of ESLint security rules, and I'm going to show you one of these in a second. So at the moment, they're not framework specific, but that's what I'm working on right now, is adding some specific framework security rules that our engineers can use as well. I noticed recently that Node Security Project also published a set of Node-specific ESLint security rules. So if you use Node and ESLint, you can grab those for free as well. We plan to open source all of the stuff I'm talking about. We plan to open source as well going forward. So these rules are there to help engineers build secure code, right? If they already use ESLint, they can just take these rules, add it to their existing checks, and then they get a basic set of security checks happening. So I wanted to just quickly show you one of those rules. It might not show too well on the screen, actually, if the code's a bit small, but the point is that we wanted to do two things with the rules, right? We wanted to make sure that they were configurable for an engineer. So there are a few things like the encoders. We don't go along and say to a team, hey, you have to use this encoder for the security team to be happy. We just say, look, you decide what you want to use that you think will cover this vulnerability and add it to a property file. When the rule runs, that's the encoder that it's going to look for. We're also adding some things around there if it's a false positive or a known issue that they can define what that comment looks like, so they can comment their code however they want. But really in this code, we're just going to iterate through their code, checking different assignments to variables and trying to see whether ultimately it's something that a player or an external entity would have created that's gone into a dangerous place without doing output encoding in these cases. And then if that's the case, then down here we basically just create a report and say, like, hey, in this place in your code, it looks like there's a security vulnerability. You're missing some output encoding. So we have a set of rules for that, and I'm currently working on rules for different frameworks as well. One of the things that we wanted to do with these rules after we wrote them is try and figure out how could we make them more useful to more people. So security engineers use different tools in general, right? If you do web application security testing, you're almost guaranteed to be using a tool called Burp Suite. Actually, it's very useful to developers as well. If you want to check it out, it's free. It's super powerful from a security point of view. So what I wanted to do is basically add a plugin to Burp Suite that enabled security testers to use these rules when they were testing a website that was using JavaScript. And so the next video is even shorter than the last one, but it shows a vulnerable piece of JavaScript being returned in a response from a website, and all the security engineer has to do is right-click it and tell it to scan with the ESLint rules. And then within like a second or two, they'll see the results back in Burp Suite telling them that there's a security vulnerability in that piece of code. So happens really quick. It's basically just those ESLint rules run against that bit of code, and then down here is telling them, hey, in that JavaScript that's just been returned, there's probably a security vulnerability at this point. So what I also then wanted to do on top of that was figure out, a little bit like Leona here, she's looking a bit cooler than she did in the video earlier, is how can we protect more people with these rules? And a few other things on top of that. So we created a project that we call our GitHub security scanner. So the majority of code in Riot is in GitHub, apart from some things which go into Perforce. But most projects are in GitHub. So what we wanted to do was figure out that teams might not know about these rules. They might not use ESLint. For some reason, they might not use what we've built. So what we actually built was this GitHub security scanner. And what this does is it looks, using the GitHub API, our internal GitHub API, it looks for any repositories that have had changes in them in the past 24 hours. It'll check all of the commits that were made, and if any of the commits were new JavaScript or JavaScript that's been changed, it'll clone the repository, it'll run these ESLint security rules across them, and then create a report. Real simple, nothing fancy about it yet, but what that means is, in Riot, there's like 12,000 repositories in GitHub. Whether people create a new one, they change stuff, anywhere in the world, every single day, every JavaScript change within Riot gets a basic security review done every single day. And so this runs every morning and it's super fast. What we also wanted to try and do then was expand this a little bit further and figure out that we know when new things are created. And rather than coming to a software engineer at the end of their development lifecycle and saying, hey, did you consider all these security things? We wanted to reach out to them as soon as they started building something. So this is a Slack bot, which is another component of the security scanner now, and that we look for new repositories every single day. We then try and identify the technology that is being used. So in this case, the bot saw that it was a new Node.js project, and then we just send a DM once. It's not spammy, none of those kind of things. Just does this once for a repository. It'll send it and just say, hey, look, it looks like this new thing you're building is using Node. Here's a few security things that we think would help you build this securely. And then if you want to reach us to talk about it further, then that's how you contact us. So the next iteration of this will bring a few more things into it. So if you stick on the subject of Node, the Node Security Project has a cool little tool, or you can use their web service that allows you to check the dependencies in your package.json for security vulnerabilities. So some of our teams already do that. But if we know that someone just created a Node project and we're already going to contact them anyway, well then why don't we actually scan their package.json at that point and tell them whether they have any security vulnerabilities from day one so they can fix it. But on top of that, we want to add the ability for engineers to respond to this and set up scheduled scans both for ESLint rules, other security tools we have, and so on, so that it can just very easily be done in a couple of replies to a bot in Slack rather than Hangouts, Skype, any of those kind of things with the security team. What we also try and do on top of that is, if we have these engineers who give us these great ideas, help us build these secure products, we wanted to borrow on a concept from the game. So the image you see on the screen now is what we call the Victorious Sivir skin. You could only get that if you played League of Legends last year and you played to a certain level. So it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can't go and buy that skin. And we wanted to reward security champions at Riot in similar ways. So initially we created these really cool t-shirts that not many people in Riot have. You get those t-shirts if you do something that the security team looks at and is like, wow, we didn't expect someone to do that. Right? And that's not just for software engineers. We've given them out to people in finance. We've given people out all across the organization, but out of 2,000 plus people, we've probably only given about 100 of them out. And so when people see them, it's not something they can go and buy. People ask questions of like, how did you get that t-shirt? And those people can tell those other people at Riot why they've been given this thing from security. We also buy, like I talked about before, conference tickets for people. We also try and enable security champions to go and tell their story to other people. So at Riot, we often host security meetups in Los Angeles and Dublin, where we talk about what we do as a security team. And so in January this year, we got one of our security champions to speak at that. And he talked about how he helped his team design and ship the new authentication and authorization system for 70 million players globally. And so he talked about how they designed that securely, but also how they integrated security into their process in a way that actually enabled them to build and ship things quicker. Now that carries far more weight than me as a security person standing up and saying that we can do that for a team. But the point is, he was able to go and present to a lot of people. It was so awesome, we also then offered him the chance to be flown over to Dublin and give the same talk over in Dublin as well. So he got to come and visit another country, which was quite cool for him and his family. But ultimately, like, if you haven't got an application security program, or you've got one that you're trying to develop and build up, the thing is that you're never going to have the perfect program from day one, right? That if you're starting out new, things like the Microsoft Secure Development Lifecycle Guidance is handy, but it probably only works at Microsoft. It's not going to work for probably anyone else, but it doesn't mean there's not good information in there. So as a security person, I kind of think of it like League of Legends. You won't win a World Championship trophy there by winning one game, and you won't win the application security program game by shipping one product that has no vulnerabilities in it, right? You need to step back, think about what's important and what you can add to the way that you build things, and then hopefully you'll end up start shipping more secure products. So I hope some of that was useful to you people and you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I have a couple of minutes left, so feel free to fire away, or I'm around this evening and tomorrow as well. Thank you.